Welcome, airsick lowlanders. Grab a bowl of stew and take a seat. In this video, Rock and I are going to break down every action, free action, and reaction available during combat in the Cosmere RPG. By the end of this video, you should know everything that a character can do in a round of combat in the Cosmere RPG. But before we get to that, we're going to start with the basics of combat, and then we'll get to our opinion of how good this system really is. Like with most other TTRPGs, much of the time spent at the table is spent narratively, where it doesn't matter which order players act. This could be time used for exploration, simple social encounters, or other actions that don't have immediate consequences. However, in situations where individual choices and actions can have consequences, you are entering what is referred to as a scene. A scene is a more structured style of play, similar to combat in a lot of TTRPGs. However, in the Cosmere RPG, there are three different types of scenes. You have conversations, you have endeavors, and you have combat. Today we're going to be mostly talking about combat. However, we will do videos following up on those other two options as well, so stay tuned. Combat is played out in rounds, which represent a short period of time during the fight. Specifically in the Cosmere RPG, a round lasts for 10 heartbeats, which will give some immediate implications to Cosmere readers. Each round of combat consists of all players taking a turn, using a variety of actions to do things such as move and attack to try and achieve their goals. Instead of having a turn order, a round is broken into 4 phases. We have fast turns and slow turns, and they are taken always in the order of the players first and then enemies and NPCs second. The GM will ask which players would like to have a fast turn, and any players that would like to can act first. These players will gain 2 actions on their turn. After they've finished their turn, the GM can choose any enemies or NPCs that would like to have a fast turn as well, also gaining 2 actions. And then we move on to phases 3 and 4, which are the slow turns. Phase 3 allows all players that would like to have a slow turn to act, gaining 3 actions this time. And once they've all finished their actions, then the GM can have any NPCs or enemies complete their slow turn with 3 actions. You'll notice in this system that players always get to act before the enemies if they would like, and this allows for a really quick, punchy combat where you're not rolling for initiative. Each round, the players can dynamically choose if they'd like to go fast or slow, but that doesn't even slow it down, as the GM is able to simply ask who would like to go first, or who would like to have a fast turn each round. If you're looking for a longer discussion around combat, you can click the link that's up here somewhere, where we'll go through a full episode with an overview of combat. We're going to talk on things like what happens if you're caught in an ambush, gaining advantage or disadvantage on your moves or your actions, the different types of armor and defense, the different weapons that can be used, what happens when your health drops to 0, character death, a lot of these sort of things. If the link's not there, please hit subscribe because it'll be coming out soon. Finally, before we dive into actions, it's important to note that some moves can take a different amount of actions on your turn to complete, representing the amount of time it takes to do that move. So for example, a lot of actions will have a symbol that looks like this. That means it takes exactly 1 action to do, but you can also have 2 actions or 3 actions that are required in order to complete an action. First up is the brace action, which you can take once per turn. You'll understand why in a moment. With the brace action, you hide behind cover that is within 5 feet of you to defend against incoming attacks. All attacks against you while you're behind cover gain disadvantage, so long as you still have cover. You're only protected from attacks from the other side of your cover. If you have a weapon with a defensive trait, including things like a shield, then you can actually use the brace action behind that weapon or shield. Disengage. Next up, we have the disengage action. Disengage allows you to move 5 foot away from an enemy as part of the action that is within attack range of you, without them being able to take a reactive strikes reaction. Reactive strikes is the equivalent of Dungeons & Dragons attack of opportunity. However, I believe it's more balanced. We'll get to that in a moment when we talk through reactions. But for now, the disengage action is solid. It allows you to move away. It gives you a little bit of movement as part of that action, and it means that you're not going to get hit. We then have gain advantage, which is a slightly more complicated action, and we'll get into the details of that one here. So gain advantage is where you use a skill and try and gain the upper hand over an enemy, rolling against their relevant defense. So this could be a deduction test to try and predict their next move, gaining advantage on your next attack. But it really does encourage roleplay and gets players used to describing what their characters are doing, which is always a great way to play with any move, really. But this one specifically encourages the players or pushes the players to tell the GM what they're doing and why that should help them in that situation. Next up, we have the interact action, which allows you to interact with an object that's within reach. It could be drawing a weapon, opening a door, or picking up a dropped item. And this is the first action on the list that can be used more than once in a turn. So you could pick up multiple items, for example. Next up, we have the move action, which allows you to move up to your movement distance on your turn as an action, which makes sense. If you are crawling or climbing or swimming or anything else like that, you are given the slowed condition, which would allow you to only move up to half of your movement speed as part of that action. And like the interact action, this action can be used more than once in a turn. So you could actually use the movement action 3 times if you took a slow turn, for example. Next up, we have the strike action, where you make an attack test against an enemy's physical defense. The attack test can then be repeated 1 additional time with a weapon that's in another hand. So if you've got an offhand weapon, maybe you're dual wielding daggers, you can stab with the other weapon. However, this costs you 2 focus points. Focus is a resource that all characters have, and it helps you when you're using a more complex or complicated move or maneuver within combat. The amount of focus a character has is 2 plus their willpower attribute. So most characters will have 4 to 6 focus at the start of the game, but it really does depend on the build of your character. Once again, in our combat overview video, we will discuss attack tests, how they work, how your dice rolls work, and how much damage you do, the different types of attack and the different types of damage you can do with different weapons. But for now, this is just the standard action that is used, strike, when you're trying to make an attack. The next action is use a skill. This just allows you to use a relevant skill during combat. So this could be a medicine test that you'd like to do to attempt to heal a friend. It could be a perception test that you do to try and see a stealthed enemy. Anything that you think you want to try and do that would normally be an action you do outside of combat. If you're trying to do it in combat, your GM will allow you to do that as an action. The next action in line is the grapple action, where you attempt to grab an enemy. This costs 2 actions this time around, and you make an athletics test that is contested against their physical defense to see if you can grab them. If you are able to grab the enemy, then they then gain the restrained condition, which reduces their movement to 0, and they have a disadvantage on all tests that they're doing, except for a test that would be to get out of the grapple. On first read, the rules for grapple seemed a little bit unclear as to how you actually escape the grapple. The restrained condition says that if whatever caused the condition doesn't state the amount, then the GM can choose how and if it can be escaped, which is slightly concerning, or was slightly concerning, but we'll get to it soon. As you keep reading, you'll realize that there are actually other ways that are mentioned a little bit further in the book as well. So far, when attempting to break a grapple, I've allowed characters to make a contested athletics test, both rolling against each other. And if the grappled target or the grappled character is higher with their athletics test, then they're able to break 3. That works fine. If you're used to playing that way, that works. But we'll come back to this when we talk about the shove action shortly. Next up, we have the ready action, where you spend an action now to prepare to respond to something that will happen before your next turn. You have to specify what will be the trigger, so what will cause you to then use the action, as well as what your response will be or your action will be. An example here could be that you are waiting for enemies to appear around a corner, so you would like to hold a ranged attack option. So you're going to use strike to use with a ranged weapon. So you spend 1 action now, as well as an action, or however many actions it costs to do the held action. So in this case, it would be 1 to ready, and then 1 for strike. So you're using 2 actions to stand there, and then after your turn, if an enemy appears around the corner, you've hit your trigger, and you can use that strike action. This can also include free actions that you're holding, which wouldn't cost anything extra. And a fancy thing, I guess, with this, if you're a D&D player and you're not used to these rules, because move is now an action, you can hold a move action. So maybe you're waiting for enemies to come and you want to run away if they do come. You can ready a move action, and then as the enemies appear, you run away. Maybe that's what you want to do in combat. I'm not sure. Hey, that's up to you, all right? That is your choice.
Goop, goop, goop.
Next up, we have the recover action. This action can only be used once per scene, so per combat. And you're pretty much taking a moment to have a breather. You then get to roll your recovery dice, and you can increase your focus or your health, or any combination of the two, based off the result. So if you roll a 5, you might gain 2 health and 3 focus, depending on what you want to get. The size of your recovery die is based off your willpower attribute. So those characters that do choose to invest a little further into willpower will actually be able to recover more health or focus during combat, which is good to know. Next up, we have shove. This is where you try to push someone or pull someone or push them sideways. It doesn't actually matter which direction they move, but you make an athletics test against their physical defense. And if you succeed, you can push them in whichever direction you'd like. Except for, I guess, up in the air. It has to be horizontal. It states that specifically. This is where it gets interesting when it comes to grappling. You can shove a character that is grappling you, therefore breaking the grapple as they move away from you. Something that's good to know, I guess. It isn't noted specifically in the grapple action, but this is a good way to break a grapple. Alrighty, that's the end of the list of basic actions that are listed in the book, although there is a section here for improvised actions that we'll touch on before we move on to free actions and reactions. So improvised actions is when you can think of something that you don't think is quite covered in the rules and you want to try it anyway. You can talk to your GM and they can, on the spot, make a ruling based off what they think that situation might need. Being a TTRPG, your character can theoretically attempt to do anything, so hopefully your GM can come up with an appropriate way to rule that. Next up, we have free actions, and you guessed it, they're free to do in your turn. They have a symbol that looks like this, and there's only a couple of basic free actions that are shown in the book, although there are more free actions that can be obtained through your Radiant path, or through your Heroic path, or even as part of the use of an item. Alright, the first free action is called Banter. Who doesn't want to have a quick chat during a combat? This allows you to say a simple sentence or two, perhaps to tell your party to target a particular enemy, or maybe when it's time to run, you tell everyone to run. The second free action listed is Drop. You drop something you're holding. We talked earlier about the Interact action, which allows you to pick up an object. Well, if both your hands are full, you might need to drop something first. This is a free action, it doesn't cost you anything, and you can drop it. Maybe you're holding a sword and a shield, and you want to pick up something valuable on the ground. You can drop your shield or your sword, hey, you do you, and pick up that object. Now we move on to reactions. We mentioned that you can have 2 actions on a fast turn or 3 actions on a slow turn. There are actually other ways to gain actions through your paths as well, but everyone also gains 1 reaction on their turn, or I should say within each round, because a reaction is actually something that you're doing outside of your turn in response to something else that happens. The first reaction we have here is called Aid. Aid allows you to assist a friend or an ally with something that they're doing, giving them advantage on the task. So maybe they're attacking an enemy and you're nearby. You might be able to distract the enemy, therefore giving advantage to your friend. Perhaps they're trying to break down a particularly strong door, so you can imagine your character also putting a shoulder into the door and therefore giving advantage to the test that your friend is doing. Pretty simple and useful. The next reaction is called Avoid Danger. This can be used in a variety of situations to try and get rid of or to avoid a negative outcome. You make an agility test. If this is used against an enemy's test, such as when someone is trying to shove you, then you would make a contested test. So it would be your agility test versus their athletics test in that case. And the higher result would, well, if you were able to roll equal to or higher than their result, I should say, then you would avoid that negative outcome. So you can dodge their shove in a way. If it's a situation such as avoiding falling rocks, then you need to roll a 15 or higher on your test. Next up, we have the dodge reaction. This one might confuse D&D players a little bit, as in that game, dodge is an action. In the Cosmere RPG, dodge is a reaction that you take when an enemy uses or makes an attack test against you. This will cost you 1 focus, but it gives disadvantage on the attack that they're making towards you. It's important to note this will only give disadvantage to that single attack. It's not going to be for the entire round or until your next turn, but you can use it at the right time to still avoid damage. And it's also important to note that if the attack is targeting multiple targets, or if it's an area attack, then you are not able to use the dodge reaction, but you could still use avoid danger, that we just discussed. The final reaction that we have here is the reactive strike reaction. This is where an enemy tries to move away from you during combat, so they're within your attack range and they try to move away, and then you can use an action and spend a focus point to attempt to make an attack against them. It might seem expensive to need to spend a focus point in order to do what would be called an attack of opportunity in a Dungeons & Dragons game, However, I actually think that that's a huge flaw of that game that causes a lot of players or a lot of characters to get stuck together on the battlefield for fear of being attacked. In this game, it makes for really fast-paced, fluid combat where characters can move around wherever they need to move. But if you need to, or you want to take advantage of a situation, you can still burn that focus point in order to take the attack. Further from the standard actions that we've discussed here, there are also other actions, free actions, and reactions that could become available to you depending on your choices in gameplay. For example, if you have a mount, dismounting or mounting costs 2 actions. There are other things that cost free actions. For example, if you wanted to stand up from being prone, laying on the ground, it's a free action, although it will reduce your movement speed by 5 for the rest of that turn. There's also the free action of trying to alert an ally where you're stealthed. So maybe you want to signal an ally where you are without the enemy seeing you. If you've got line of sight of that ally, you can use a free action to do so. And then from level 2, if you're starting down the Radiant path, you unlock other actions such as Breathe Stormlight. Breathing Stormlight allows you to fill up your investiture with an action. You also gain Regenerate, which allows you to heal yourself using the Stormlight or the investiture that you have. Both of those actions can actually be used when you're unconscious as well, allowing you to breathe in Stormlight and even heal yourself while you're unconscious on your turn during combat, which I think is fascinating, really interesting. And you'll also get the Enhance ability, which is an action that allows you to increase your strength and your speed, and then you can maintain that with a free action every turn. So this represents someone breathing in Stormlight, feeling stronger, being able to heal themselves. You're a Radiant, man. You're pretty much a superhero. If you want to go down the Radiant path, you get some pretty cool stuff. Past this, there are a bunch of actions, free actions, and reactions that can be unlocked through talents based off your Radiant path or your Heroic path. Alright, Rock, what did you think of combat in the Cosmere RPG?
No violence.
Really?
This thing is only for Fourth Sons. We settle this thing over good stew instead.
I mean, I personally wouldn't go that far. I think it's probably subjective. I'm sure some people will love it. I think there's some real improvements to other games. I do think it's genuinely a really solid system. Obviously, it's a little bit more complicated. It's not a simple RPG. It's a little bit more complicated than some. But anyone that's played Dungeons & Dragons or played any other more complicated RPGs will be fine. And if you're a Cosmere fan, you should have no problem learning it. I think it'll be easy. Please like the video if you learned anything new today, and subscribe if you haven't yet. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Alright, not too bad.